Greetings and welcome to episode 142 of the 4Ps. I am just back inside from yet another round of shoveling snow as a storm descended on just about every state in the union this week, except for maybe Florida. Although in Florida, a storm of a different kind is wreaking havoc. That's right, it's Super Bowl media frenzy, and we are in the thick of it. The big game will take place this Sunday between the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs and the hometown Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's the future quarterback GOAT, Pat Mahomes, against the current GOAT, Tom Brady. And for the past 20 years, I've had this mixed feelings relationship with Tom Brady. I am a fan of another rival NFL team and have been for many years, and his success was always quite painful. But as a University of Michigan college football fan, his success is a great reflection on that program. The 4Ps. Professional. Political. I've become increasingly disenchanted with the NFL over the past 5 years. I've talked about it here. I've disagreed even with the decision to have a season this year at all. And I am amazed that the NFL made it through 20 weeks, though many teams did have severe COVID issues, and you wonder how things might have been different had COVID not been an issue. The NFL is the only sport where watching from home is definitively better than the in-stadium, in-arena experience. But every game with empty or partially empty-filled stands was a constant reminder of how terrible things are for so many people across the country. Something professional. One thing I've truly grown to appreciate about the Super Bowl is the marketing spectacle that it has become. I appreciate the creativity of the advertising community taking center stage almost as much as I relish in the critical communal discussion about the quality of each advertisement. Of course, we know that not all of the winners and losers need to win with a TV commercial, and a significant amount of longtime advertisers are actually sitting this one out. It's going to be curious to see how and where brands compete for our attention this Sunday. I'll care less about the game itself and more about what's happening in the periphery. In case you're curious, my prediction is Kansas City 37, Tampa Bay 25. Now, if this is a topic that interests you, I will be hosting a live discussion with other luminaries in the marketing community during the game, starting at 6 p.m. this Sunday, on Clubhouse. So join us, listen in, ask questions, and share your opinions as the ads run through. It's also going to be my first Clubhouse hosting experience, so it's also possible that I will screw things up pretty significantly. That alone should be reason enough for you to tune in. Something practical. Everything has already been said or written about last week's GameStop stock market frenzy, from the debate on the free market ideology of the stock market to Robinhood CEO's bizarro CNBC interview. So I'm not going to opine here on the legality or the morality or even the viability of what happened from a financial perspective, really in terms of individual wealth or the institution of the stock market itself. But what I will say is that as a novice investor, last week was a whole lot of fun. I got caught up in the excitement in a way that compelled me to learn even more about what was happening and why. It made me smarter. It was strange to see everyone explaining to everyone else how they think the stock market works. But it was also one of those rare moments when usually boring financial news dominated every single conversation, including the one I had with the manager at our local hardware store when I popped in to buy light bulbs over the weekend. For me, the key takeaway is that investing and trading are two very different things. Investing is a long-term strategy for growing your wealth. It's about saving. Whereas trading is much more micro-tactical. Yes, you need to trade and execute trades when you are investing, but you can rely on brokers for that. Short-term trading can be a means of building wealth for a select few group of people, but it's also somewhat of a gamble. Leaving the volatility of the GameStop and other stocks alone, I will tell you that I bought AMC stock just as soon as the Wall Street Reddit crew in my Twitter feed said to do so, but only enough for it to be a fun gamble, where the entertainment of it made it worth it whether I win or lose. I evaluated my own appetite for risk and bought an amount that I was ultimately okay with losing. Right? It's the same mentality that you have when you're sitting at a blackjack table in a casino for a few hours. Personally, for trading, I use the Stash and Public apps for my stock trading. But it was fascinating to see how Robinhood's decision to suspend trading of a few dozen stocks completely decimated its brand in a matter of hours. But the potential risk for both traders and investors is that the reduced barriers to entry for trading with the apps that I just mentioned, it actually enables those without real knowledge or expertise to alter the market en masse. And that's dangerous. It's kind of like the guy who, in the casino at the table next to you, is hitting on 17 when the dealer is showing a 3 because he has a feeling or a hunch. Now, bad investing at scale can hurt everybody else. Of course, none of these things really matter if you're investing in Bitcoin. Something personal. Every few days I see this ad on Facebook and Instagram for this dad newsletter, right? It's a subscription. And while I've always been proudly immune to social media advertising, this one has really resonated lately. I haven't yet caved and paid for, I don't know, something like a $99 annual subscription, but I've actually come close a few times. These last 11 months have been unbearable for so many on every conceivable level. And while my kids are happy and healthy, I can't help but feel that we're missing out on opportunities to do things together. When you're stuck inside during the winter without places to go, it's freezing out. It requires a level of creativity to get them off of their digital devices that I just no longer possess. Hence why that dad newsletter hits home. The copy in the ad says something like, "You only have a few years to form connections that will last a lifetime with your kids." No pressure or anything, right? My kids are turning 10 and 7 this year. So it may be now or never before loading up the Harry Chapin on Spotify. But do we really need external suggestions or some guide through the wilderness of these child-rearing years? While the step-by-step directions to perfect parenthood would be nice, what if we stop trying to become the perfect parent and embrace being a flawed one instead? I've been a parent now for approximately 100,000 hours, 10 years. That's far more than the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell and others say is required to establish expertise. I'm there. Makes me more of a qualified expert and someone who can share practical advice to the tune of tuning into your child's intuitions and learning to accept yourself and your children just the way we are. So first, knowing which battles to pick, it's both an art and a science. Stop worrying or being afraid of other people's judgments. Distinguish which rules are important for your family and focus on the signals your child is giving you. Tuning in is going to help you to get off autopilot and access your intuition. That's it. It's that simple. As if. If only we could really make things that simple with simple platitudes. Parenting is both an internal and an external power struggle. Ultimately, the biggest mindset change that I've struggled with, while it's probably maintaining realistic expectations for our kids. It's also helpful to think that parenting is not transactional in nature. We don't do things for our kids in the expectation of getting something in return. Find ways to reduce stress by looking at the things we do for our kids that we can afford, whether it's financially or emotionally, right? So if driving them to school in the morning is adding just extra stress, stop driving them to school. Post-COVID, of course. I touched on this a couple weeks ago, but it's the tech addiction that is probably stressing me out the most. Yet I'm failing to lead by example. We all know how dangerous screen time is for our kids, but there's less attention to the ways that it's permeated our lives as adults. We're modeling technology addiction, and we're not as present as we need to be. Distracted attention is profoundly disconcerting for kids because they never know when you're listening. My daughter walks in here all the time when I'm working and showing me something that she's made, and art, drawing something. And sometimes I'm engaged, and sometimes I'm like, oh, yeah, that's really interesting, and I get back to work. So what I'll do is try my best to set time parameters for the kids. It's important. I know of a friend of mine who, when they have to check their phone, when they're around his kids, will say, "Excuse me, I need to send an urgent message. I'll be right back," right? It sounds absurd to like set expectations with your kids, but saying aloud what you're doing actually gives them explicit information about when they do and when they don't have your attention. Parenting is a balance between letting your kids explore their own personality development and firm leadership to keep them from significant bodily injury and harm. Our kids should never think that they're in charge. I mean, they're emotionally immature little shitheads and completely unprepared for anything more than small amounts of personal independence. So establishing boundaries, even if you occasionally show some lenience with them, is important for their own emotional development. Encountering situations where they don't get their way is essential for building our children's resilience long term. Remember that real change happens slowly and gradually. Instead of enforcing every single boundary so rigidly at once, building up over time is it's important and helpful and healthy. So there's no perfect way to parent. Our intuition can tell us everything that we need to know. And more importantly, we should learn to see our children for who they really are. Let's realize that we're doing the best we can, or at least have every intention of doing the best that we can. Let's remember to be grateful for the important things. For example, my kids love spending time together. They make each other laugh. They play well together on their own. They're creative and imaginative. They'll occasionally fight over the remote control, but this is one aspect of parenting that I feel most fortunate and find myself asking, what did we do right? More than anything, I think we carefully balance any tendency to favor one child over another. Though if anyone has any ideas what I could do with my kids this Saturday while mom is at work, I'm certainly open to any and all suggestions. And something political. When you think about the current spectrum of social and political ethos and the mapping of ideas and beliefs and values from left to right, it becomes increasingly visible just how much has changed. Anyone with any shred of redeeming value in society will decry the violence or physical threats, no matter their beliefs and ideology. Yet, the imbalance of hate and destruction and violence in America stems from an increasingly vocal and active faction of the population that is becoming more vocal and more active. The past 4 years have been really interesting and scary. It's seen an emboldened right-wing extremist movement that expanded the spectrum of political discourse. This group, which is now exemplified by the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, it's bringing white supremacy and science denialism and weapon fetishism, anti-vaxxing, anti-masking, all these things to the forefront. Extremists on the left, maybe exemplified by AOC, are pushing an agenda of racial and social equality, LGBTQ rights and marriage equality, healthcare for all, protecting the environment and a woman's right to choose, reducing gun violence, imposing a higher tax on the wealthiest 1% of Americans and corporations. That's the left's extremism. But this is no longer a question of liberalism or conservatism or Democrats versus Republicans. It's a battle for our future that comes down to understanding the difference between knowledge and beliefs. Knowledge is what happens when people have access to facts. It's limited to what we possess, either by learning or sensing. This is a slippery subject, right? Because as information that is inaccurate creates a false set of beliefs, people may think they have knowledge, but they don't. There's a difference between knowing something to be true and believing it to be true. Every day we're inundated with information. Some of it is authentic, some of it is misleading, and much of it is downright false. Knowledge is often intermingled with opinion and propaganda, and people circulate select knowledge within social and political bubbles. I'll break it down a little bit. Externalists argue that to know something is true, it's sufficient to have a relationship to the facts, whereas internalists are of the seeing is believing set believing supporting evidence to validate beliefs is true. In short, externalists believe we can know something without clear-cut evidence, while internalists believe we can't. Critical for differentiating between knowledge and belief is how we combine first-party evidence, things that we see and witness ourselves and learn, with second-party testimony, things we learn from other sources, be it people or other references. Reductionist thinkers believe we possess critical capabilities like inference and memory and perception. And with these faculties, we're better able to assess the reliability of that testimony and the knowledge it contains. So whether you fancy yourself an internalist, an externalist, or a reductionist, or some combination of, knowledge is immutable. Truth cannot shift from person to person or between situations, but knowledge and belief become melded by context. For example, you may believe a professional basketball player to be tall. They're 6'3", right? That guy is far taller than the average man, who is 5'9". We know that the average man is 5'9" based on years of data. Yet when compared to other basketball players, this 6'3" guy is much shorter in comparison to other players around him and may not be even considered tall in this context. The notion of tall or short is a belief, whereas obtaining data about the average heights of both basketball players as a population and the broader population as a whole, that's knowledge. Those who've learned to think critically and ask questions are better able to discern, interrogate, and understand how we come to know what we know, and whether what we really know and what we think we know encourages us to evaluate critically the information we take in, the beliefs that we hold, and the knowledge that we ultimately take for granted. So now you know. Enjoy the game this weekend.